Hello, welcome to EPG Pathshala. This is part 2 of the module on identity under culture studies. This is Pramod K. Nair of the Department of English, the University of Hyderabad. Having looked at the construction of identity, the unstable nature of identity, the performance of identity in the previous module, we will look at some examples that deal with caste and race and class here. We already looked at gender in some substantial way in the previous one. We are not interested really in what caste is. We are interested in culture studies in how caste gets constructed, in how the identity of being of this caste or that caste is part of a larger process of representations and discourses. You'll remember that identity is something that we perform, that is assigned to us, and into which you need to fit in some way or the other. Caste is traditionally understood as a hierarchic ordering of society under Hinduism, sanctioned in certain ancient scripts like the Manusmriti. The problem for reformers like Jyotiba Phule, Ambedkar later, has been that the choice of caste has never been with certain segments of society. That is, the ordering of society into certain castes was itself a strategy to keep certain people at the lower menial level to do certain lower menial work. Caste is not innate, it's not immanent, it's not natural. It is the division of human beings by some human beings who then elect themselves as elite and superior, the Brahmins for instance. Ambedkar famously defined caste system as the division of labor and the laborer. What he was implying was, there is no such thing as a body, as a human, naturally suited to certain kinds of labor. What he was pointing to is the argument we have already noted. The question of an individual's identity is not a question the individual answers. It's answered for them, for him or her. Identity as a social construction in this case means you are told, you are assigned a caste identity, and because you are deemed to belong to a particular caste, you will perform certain kinds of jobs. Please remember that caste is linked to occupation and the kind of work you do. Now, the interesting part to this is, as Ambedkar noted, the minute you start performing certain tasks, you validate the caste identity bestowed upon you. So it is not that you choose to perform that particular task. You are first told you belong to this caste and you will do this job. When you do the job, you are told, look, you have done the job, that means you are of that caste. In theory, it is called self-fulfilling stereotypes. You are fitted into a stereotype. When you perform that stereotype, you are deemed to have proved the stereotype to be correct. Please recall what we said in the first module. Femininity being performed and performed repeatedly is what constructs you as a woman. So as Ambedkar, Jyotiba Phule and others argued in their campaigns against untouchability in India, it is not that caste came naturally to the Brahmins and to the lower castes. These were instituted as social processes, specifically the process of labor, rituals, eating habits, clothing, and social relations, how you walk, how you dress, and so on and so forth. Every time the lower caste performed a certain set of tasks, he or she was then stamped with the mark lower caste. What is important here to note is that in your performance of caste, you have very little flexibility to move away from what is predestined for you, preordained for you. This has nothing to do with how you might naturally feel about whether you belong here or not, whether you want to do this job or not. The important thing to notice here is that for culture studies of caste, caste is a performance. Caste is socially determined. Caste is not biological. You will need to keep this in mind also because we will make the same arguments about race. Now, you will recall in the earlier module the performance of femininity, the clothes you wear, the way you talk, the way you behave, walk, the professions you choose are chosen for you in advance. If femininity is performed, so is caste. The Marxist version of this is the obsession with class. When industrial modernity arrived somewhere in the late 18th and early 19th century, the capitalists needed people to work in the factories. An argument made was, oh, certain people are fit only for manual labor. Do also keep in mind what I have already said about caste and labor. Right? These examples go together. So you discover the European society splitting into two: those who control the factors of production, those who enacted the factors of production. Some people owned the land and provided the money, bought the machinery, others worked at the machinery. It was said, hey, look, these people can't do anything but run the machines. They don't have the intelligence to plan or execute. They can only be ordered to perform certain tasks. You will recall here Charlie Chaplin's famous take on it in modern times. The endless, repetitive, mind-numbing process of production which dehumanizes you. Now look at what I have already said about the self-fulfilling stereotype of laborers. You perform a task because you are told, oh, you are not fit for anything else. You go on performing the task, you believe it yourself, and you are stamped as the person who can only do these things. Chaplin's Modern Times illustrates that in an extraordinarily funny way. The point here is, class is again an organization, a hierarchic ordering of society, in which certain classes assume dominant roles and dominant forms, and others become subordinate. The working classes, women, and in certain parts of the world, certain communities, become the menial classes, the working classes, the proletariat. This implies also a division not only of labor but of profits. If in the caste system the upper caste controlled, say, education, in the class system the upper classes controlled profits. So I am bringing caste and class together for you to understand how identity gets forged. So the lower caste who performs certain forms of labor, the lower class who performs factory work, are both condemned to perform this endlessly because that is deemed to be their sole identity, their sole quality. There is no way you escape this. Now you can surely ask, in the last module we spoke about resistance to identity and how come that the identity that you are of the lower caste or the lower class cannot be resisted. The answer in Marxism is ideology. Ideology convinces you that you are naturally suited to this job and this job alone. Ideology is a system of thinking, unconscious, which percolates through society, which creates a certain way of thinking that you then internalize. So for the capitalists, it was important for the working class to accept that they are fit only for labor, that they are not thinking creatures, they are animals, and they can certainly not perform intellectual activity. For the lower caste, or as was then called in the 19th century, the untouchables of India, they began to believe, yes, of course, we are of the lower caste, we cannot do this, we cannot do that, intellectual activity is not for us. Ideology constructs identities in certain way so that you deem those identities to be natural. Ideology is the mask over the social processes that constructs identities in certain ways. Remember what I told you about consumer cultures and femininity last time, how the emphasis on fairness, on height, and on intellectual competence, which mark certain valuable qualities in you. And if you don't fit those qualities, you are considered to be a deviant or you are deemed to be mediocre. For class and caste, the same arguments hold good. You are what you do. But the odd thing is, ideology tells you this is all that you can do. There's nothing else for you to do. In the 20th century, especially towards the last half, the marketplace has determined what you can and can't do. The rise of the service sector, for instance, has earmarked certain professions as better. If previously the professions of engineering and medicine were much sought after in India, from the 90s you see a shift towards things like human resources and finance. Why is there this shift? Because the service economy that arose in the wake of globalization has demonstrated a need, has created a need for these specific skills as crucial. Now surely you can see an identity shift taking place. Ideology in the late 20th century says and convinces you that the most significant skill set is having the ability to do, say, finance. This immediately suggests that an identity is being designed for you. Why is this important for you to fit into that skill set? It's not only a question of employment. Remember what I said, identities are about power. The minute you acquire a skill set, you become part of a professional managerial class that has a certain social standing. When you acquire class or caste status, you perform a social identity in which you possess considerably more power. Think in terms of race now. The woman performs femininity. The lower caste performs lower caste identity. The working class performs working class identity. You will recall in the first module we spoke about identity as examined by the post-colonial theorists. What the colonial period did from roughly the 15th century through to the middle of the 20th is to present the races of Africa, Asia and South America as inferior, animal and barbarian. The argument they made was, these people are only fit for certain kinds of work. We are here to rule. Well, why can't they rule? Because they are unfit to rule. They cannot rule themselves. The point here is, the identity of being a barbaric, uncivilized, incapable of democracy, incapable of self-governance, this identity is bestowed upon the conquered nations based on racial difference. In the United States, from the founding period downwards, the creation of an institution of slavery was based on the assumption that the blacks can only do certain kinds of labor. Surely you will know that increasingly you see a debate where the caste system and slavery have been linked for precisely this reason. In both cases, the emphasis was on the physical attributes and the kind of physical labor that certain castes and certain races can perform. When slavery was instituted, the argument made was, oh, but these blacks are not capable of anything else. Now, the ideology of capitalism and the ideology of national identity that you see happening in the United States demanded labor. They needed people to work for them. And the only way you could do that was to bring in people who are deemed to be useless at everything else but labor. So ideologically, the United States constructs itself on the premise that there are the whites who can rule and there are the blacks who need to be ruled. Like in the colonial period, the European races were meant to rule and the races from Asia and Africa were meant to be ruled. Racial difference then becomes stereotyped as superior races and inferior races. And every time a black man or an Asian went into the system of employment at a lower level, it performed the identity on behalf of an entire race. Please remember what I have said. Identity is not only about yourself, it's about the social system in which you are located. The performance of racial inferiority reinforced the empire, like it reinforced capitalism when the lower classes performed manual labor. What you can see from all of this is that identity is hierarchic. When the social order organizes people into various groups, they don't organize them at a level. They organize them this way. It's not this way. They organize them hierarchically so that certain groups can impose their preferences over others, which is what we understand as the dominant classes. Now, if you put these two modules together, what we have said in the first and the second one now, what you discover is racial, gender, sexual, caste, class, identities are all constructions. These are not natural. These are not things over which we have total control. We have some measure of control, but not entirely. The two modules will tell you that identities are constructed in social images, representations, or what we have identified as a cultural imaginary. For cultural studies, all of these are subject to scrutiny. The construction of the inferior black in slavery, or the sportsman black when you look at examples from the Olympics downwards in popular culture in the West, the inferior castes or genders in other parts of the world. What we are looking at is the discourses in which identities are made. If you look at the two modules together, you will come to the conclusion that the question of identity is a rather fraught one. It's fraught because we are not dealing only with how people look at themselves. We are looking at the way people are made to look at themselves, the prism through which we view ourselves, and that prism is cultural. Thank you.